Hello, everybody. So it is noon, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Um, Welcome, and thank you for coming to this next event in the Friends Virtual Lunch and Learn series. Um, so I just wanted to give a brief introduction to the series and this event before Sarah Allison takes it away. Um, so first of all, my name is Nick Havranek. I am the User Engagement Strategies Coordinator for University Libraries. And this is the virtual Lunch and Learn series. This series is held, each event is held on the third Thursday of each month at noon virtually, hence the name. And they're just to highlight a little snippet of what the libraries does to promote student, faculty, and community success in their research. So each program highlights a service or technology or collections or some aspect of the university libraries that supports that. And the programs are always free and open to the public. So if you know someone who would be interested in one of the events, feel free to share the registration link, regardless of whether or not they are affiliated with Ball State University Libraries. And then specifically about this event, this is the University Libraries Cabinet of Curiosities, a look at the rare and unique material in the archives and special collections. So Sarah Allison, head of Archives User Engagement, will be presenting some rare and unique materials in the collections. And then I think everyone was notified of this before or when you join the meeting, but it is being recorded. And these meetings are uploaded to the University Library's YouTube page. So just fair warning, heads up about that. Okay, so with that, I will hand it off to Sarah.
Well, thank you, Nick. Can everyone hear me? I always want to make sure that that's the case after I, unmute myself. Got a thumbs up from Nick. Okay, so I think we're good to go. And I hope everyone can also see the screen. So thank you for joining us today. As Nick said, I am Sarah Allison, Head of Archives User Engagement here at Ball State University Libraries. And welcome to my presentation, University Libraries Cabinet of Curiosities. I look at the rare and unique material in archives and special collections. So my goal in this Lunch and Learn is to provide a small window into some of the rare and unique material that we have in our collection, and it will mostly be book-based. We can probably do another one about our archival collections at another time. But before I jump into the material, I'd like to kind of highlight the mission of archives and special collections. So we preserve and provide access to local and university history. We have primary source material ranging from personal letters and diaries from the 19th century to the most recent issues of the Ball State student newspaper. Our book collection ranges from a leaf from the Gutenberg Bible to a galley proof of John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath. We provide course instruction on the topic of basic intro to archives, all the way to historical and archival research. We also provide subject-based instruction for individual courses such as historical and creative fiction writing, history of Muncie and Delaware County, Ball State history, and history of the book. So the rare and unique material that I'm going to discuss today is used in many ways to meet this mission. In developing this talk, I tried to stay within chronological and historical order. There may be some jumping around a bit, but it will be limited. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our illuminated manuscript collection. So this collection includes 15 leaves ranging from the 12th to the 15th century. These handwritten original pieces of artwork are on parchment or vellum. They include the incorporation of gold and silver leaf gilding, as well as a very rich palette of colors. The illuminated manuscript pages within this collection come from several texts, including a Book of Hours, the Quran, choir books, and Latin Bibles. So the three examples that we have on the screen, the first one on the far left dates back to the 1300s. This illuminated manuscript is from a Latin Bible. It is 40 lines in 2 columns with red and blue pen extending the full length of the leaf. Our example in the middle is a 15th century leaf from a book of Hours written in French. Medieval books of Hours, such as this one, are the most commonly surviving illuminated manuscript from the Middle Ages, which spanned from 1400 to 1500 in Western Europe. And our third example is actually from the 19th century. It is an illuminated leaf from the Quran. It is 19 lines in black ink with original red didactics. The gold medallions are encircled by a black line with 4 alternating red and blue dots marking the verses. There are 2 frames around the handwritten text. One is in red and one is in black ink. At the bottom, within the framed gold panel, is a floral design in blue, green, and red. So we're going to move on to our incunabulas. So the term incunabula means from the cradle of printing, and it refers to any book, pamphlet, or sheet of text printed in Europe before 1501. So most of these texts were printed with movable type. Incunabulas were produced before the printing press became widespread on the European continent. They are distinctively different from manuscripts, which were done by hand. So according to the British Library Incunabula Short Title Catalog, there are roughly 30,000 distinct incunabula editions known. There were 2 techniques in producing these printed works. One was the block book, which was printing from a single carved or sculptured wood block for each page, using the same process as a woodcut relief printing. The second technique was a typographic book, which was made by individual cast metal movable type, like on a printing press. So Archives and Special Collections is lucky to have 3 incunabulas in our collection. The 2 examples on the screen are from the Dr. Frank Felsenstein Rare Book Collection. The example on the top was printed in 1497, and the second example on the bottom of the screen was printed in 1486. So one of our real treasures is a page or a leaf from the Gutenberg Bible. So the Gutenberg Bible was the first great book to be printed using movable type in the Western world. It was printed between 1454 and 1455. Only 200 to 300 copies were printed. 47 have survived, but not all of them are complete. Incomplete copies and single leaves like this one flourished so that people everywhere could experience the pleasure of viewing a part of the book whose production marked the beginning of the modern world. It is amazing to see a remarkable piece of industry. So along with the original leaf that we have a beautiful facsimile of the Gutenberg Bible. So on the screen, you'll see at the top is our original leaf, and then down in the bottom right-hand corner is the facsimile of that page in reproduction form. And then on the left is the bound version on the outside. Oh, sorry about that. So our next item is really kind of an interesting example of what was called a chain book. So when we talk about these items in our instruction sessions, we tend to compare them to the books in the restricted section in the Harry Potter series or the books in the Library Citadel and Game of Thrones. It's always the best way to engage students with items that they may have seen on TV. So this text is not historically important other than it was published in Argentina in 1506, which is interesting since most book history is focused on Western European countries. What is interesting is the binding, the fact that it is a chained book. In early monastery libraries, when printed books were still very common and expensive to produce, circulation of volumes was controlled by fastening the book to the reading table or to a horizontal bar above it by means of a chain. The practice began in the 15th century and continued into the 18th century. So just think no late fees or library fines. It's kind of an interesting process. So somewhat unique is our hornbook collection. So these are 3-dimensional items that take their name from the thin section of a cow's horn and are used to protect small pieces of paper which had the alphabet, numbers, simple spelling words, and usually the Lord's Prayer were printed on them. These hornbooks served as a primer for children from the 15th to the 19th century. Hornbooks were made from various material, including wood, ivory, tin, and brass. So the hornbook collection came to Ball State from the Elizabeth Ball collection. She first actually donated the example at the top in 1976, and then the rest of the hornbook collection came to the library after her passing in 1982. So also too on the screen is a picture of the letter that the director of the libraries at the time had written to Miss Ball about receiving the gift, along with the including the photographs of the items being measured. And then the picture in the top left corner is are the hornbooks that we received after her passing in 1982. So this next example is what we call the jeweled book. So this is a slim volume of collections of poetry produced in a single year by John Keats. And within this edition, his poems On a Grecian Urn, To a Nightingale, On Melancholy, and The Eve of St. Agnes are all included in this volume, and they were published in 1819. As you can see, the binding is why we call it a jeweled book. The Moroccan binding is inlaid with 40 turquoise gems in a floral and arabesque pattern. Laid within the front cover is a contemporary miniature portrait of Keats on ivory, and a mother of pearl remnant is inlaid on the back cover. This book is a wonderful example or representation of what is called treasure binding. This binding technique used gold, silver, ivory, or sometimes jewels for decoration. This process of binding seemed to appear in the early medieval period, and it kind of died down through the Middle Ages. This type of binding was mostly used on grand illuminated manuscripts and religious texts used at altars and in church services. At the turn of the 20th century, there was a small revival for this process. Sangorski and Sutcliffe, a bookbinding firm in London, England, quickly revived this art form of treasure binding. The two founders, Francis Sangorski and George Sutcliffe, had met during a bookbinding class at the London County Council's Center School of Arts and Crafts. This Keats book was published in 1820, and most publicly accessible copies are bound in the Moroccan leather or the original publisher's brown cloth and brown paper boards. One copy at the Newberry Library indicates that their copy has a Sangorski and Sutcliffe binding, although it is the same Moroccan leather which the binders did produce. It is not decorated in the same manner, which makes our edition somewhat of a rarity. So another fun treasure in our collection is an example of four-edge painting. This was a technique of painting a hidden scene on the edge of a book. The painting can only be seen if you know how to fan or twist the pages. So four-edge painting dates back as far as the 10th century, mostly of symbolic design. Early English four-edge painting started around the mid to late 1600s. So there is an interesting legend of how hidden four-edge paintings on books supposedly began. And actually, it is a little timely because it has to do with the last King Charles. So Charles II of England had a lady friend, a duchess, who often borrowed his books, sometimes forgetting to return them. As the story goes, the king commissioned the court painter and the court bookbinder to devise a secret method in which his books could be identified. Between the two, they worked out a unique plan. Some weeks later, when the king was visiting the duchess, he spotted a similar looking book on the shelf. Taking it down, he said, "I'll just take my book along with me." The duchess said, "But sire, that is my book." And the king said, "Oh." Then with a sly smile, he fanned out the book and revealed what had been hidden on the inner edges, the royal coat of arms. The gilding on the outer edge had completely hidden the identification. Acknowledging that Charles had outwitted her, the Duchess sank into a deep curtsy before her king. Who knows if it's true or not, but it's a very interesting legend about how forage painting came around in England. So the subject matter of forage painting changes from decorative images and family crests to landscapes, portraits, and religious scenes. One example from our collection, which is on the screen, is a double forage painting of two landscape scenes of Edinburgh. This book, which is the English Book of Common Prayer, was printed in 1823. So as you can see in the picture, this book does not have any boards on the front or back. Since viewing the painting or hidden scene really requires one to twist and fan out the book, there's a lot of wear and tear over time. So in this case, the boards have come off. So it's not exactly a very preservation friendly design, but it can be very interesting to see the different types of images that have been painted on the books. So another example is the 1735 edition of Poor Richard's Almanac. This yearly publication by Benjamin Franklin, who used the pseudonym of Poor Richard or Richard Saunders, ran from 1732 to 1758. It sold exceptionally well for a pamphlet published in the 13 original colonies, reaching roughly 10,000 copies a year. Not just an example of Benjamin Franklin's humor, this almanac is also a wonderful example of the proliferation of printing in the 18th century. Labor, paper, and printing were cheap. These types of items were not meant to last and were for daily, monthly, or yearly consumption. The fine printing and beautiful bindings were not the focus. So we're going to jump to the end of the 19th century when the Victorian era was producing cheap books through a more mechanized production method, such as dime novels and penny dreadfuls. Books were no longer consumed for luxury or for status. So the private press movement flourished around the turn of the 20th century under the influence of William Morris. The movement is often defined by the founding of William Morris's Kelmscott Press in 1890. The private press movement was a response to the Industrial Revolution and the creation of the mechanization of work. As an offshoot of the arts and crafts movement, the printing press movement was a return to traditional printing and binding methods, with an emphasis on the book as a work of art. The books were made with high quality material and were often bound by hand. So between 1890 and 1898, the press produced 53 books, totaling some 18,000 copies. So an example of a Kelmscott Press book that we have in our collection is the story of The Glittering Plain. This was an original fantasy novel written by William Morris. It has been considered as perhaps the first modern fantasy work that united an imaginary world with the elements of the supernatural. The plot focuses on the quest of Hal Blythe of the House of the Raven to rescue his fiancée who had been kidnapped by pirates. This ultimately takes him to the utopian land of the Glittering Plain, where the inhabitants are supposedly immortal. The story first appeared in the English Literary Magazine in 1890, and the following year it was printed by Kelmscott Press. This first edition was not illustrated, but used decorative capitals and Morris's golden typeface. A second edition was printed in 1894 in a much larger size, a new typeface Troy, which was more Gothic looking, and a decorative and elaborate woodcut illustrations, which is the example in the top left corner of your screen and the bottom left corner of your screen. So the number of copies printed was small, but according to the British Library, the 1894 edition was limited to 250 paper copies and 7 vellum copies. So our edition is one of the paper copies, but bound in vellum. Another book that was produced by Kelmscott Press that we have in our collection was Hand and Soul, which is the example on the right. It was a narrative by the painter and poet Dante Gabriel Rossetti in 1849. It first appeared in the first issue of the short-lived Pre-Raphaelite Journal in January of 1850. It is one of a small handful of examples of short fiction to be published in the journal. Most of the work was poems, pictures, or essays about art. So the story is a meditation on art and spirituality, as the author recounts the artistic development and mystic experience of a fictional 13th century Italian artist. In the end, the fictional artist realizes that an artist's only duty is to express what is in his soul. Our edition, printed 13 years after Rossetti's death in 1895, is bound in stiff vellum. The colophon states that the book was, quote, finished the 24th day of October, 1895, sold by Way and Williams, Chicago. So this was one of over 500 printed copies in England to be sold in the United States. The English edition is the same, but does not include the sold by statement. Some rare book catalogers have listed this particular edition as the American edition. So this section of material from the archives is examples of what we call non-traditional format, or what I like to call fun artistic adventures. So on the screen right now, we have our collection of miniature books. So soon after the invention of movable type, printers felt a challenge to explore its limits and strove to print as small a book as they could. This practice produced what are called miniatures, and it reached its first peak in the 16th century. While some miniature books are subjects of high craft, bound in fine Moroccan leather, gilded decorations, and excellent examples of woodcuts and etchings, others are cheap, disposable, sometimes highly functional items not expected to survive. Today, miniature books are produced both as fine works of art and as commercial products. So the archives is lucky to have 3 miniature books in our collections. These are from the 20th century and were produced by Sangorski and Sutcliffe, the binders who had produced our jewel book. They are really a wonderful example of the miniature printing, coming in at 1.5 by 1 3/8 in size. Now, what's a little bit different about these is that they are handwritten. They're not printed, but they are a really good example of just how tiny books could get. So artist books or book arts are works of art that take the form of the book. So some believe the origins of this form started with William Blake's songs of innocence and of experience. Similar to the philosophy of the private press movement, a book can be a work of art. Artists have been printing and producing books for centuries, but the term or form of artist books is primarily a late 20th century form. It was prolific during the avant-garde movements, including Futurism, Dada, and Surrealism, and conceptual art. So the examples that we have in the archives and that are on the screen were produced in the 1960s and 70s, falling more into the conceptual art form of artist books. So at the top left of the screen, we have Please Plant This Book by Richard Burbage from 1968. So this is his 6th publication and was the last self-published adventure with approximately 6,000 copies. It was offered for free distribution and permission to reprint as long as the new printings were free of charge. The book is comprised of 8 individual packets with printed poems. Printed within each packet are different types of seeds, including California native flower, carrots, lettuce, and squash, so that you can build your own personal garden. The next example is on the right top. It's called Decollage Happenings by Wolf Vostel from 1966. So Vostel was a German painter and sculptor and considered to be one of the early adopters of video and installation art. So this example was printed, there are about 500 copies that were produced. It is a wooden box that includes 8 soft cover books. The bright pink one is one of the examples. It also has a matzo cracker for snacking and an Alka-Seltzer in case you get indigestion from eating the matzo cracker or reading the pamphlets that are within the book. Another example is Sentences by Robert Grenier, who was an American poet and visual artist from Minneapolis. This is the example in the middle of the blue box. And what also looks kind of like a bird when the box is open up. This book was a play or a deconstruction of the conceptual reading practices. So the book is made up of 500 cards, each containing a few typewritten words or phrases. The unbound cards are contained within a folding box, indicating that there are multiple possibilities for stacking and different sequences for the reader to read the book. And our last example of artist books is at the bottom of the screen is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll with illustrations by Salvador Dali. This book features original woodcuts and etchings by Dali. The book has a limited printing of 2,500 copies and features 12 illustrations. Each chapter is a self-contained pamphlet that includes a unique woodcut and etching by Dali. And Alice is represented by the figure skipping a rope, which you can see on the title page at the bottom left. And I will say too, this is one of the more interesting books that our students really enjoy taking a look at when they take our instruction sessions. So all of these wonderful items are used in many of our instruction sessions, tours, and outreach events. Much of this information and historical background required additional research. If you have the author, title, date, and a description, you can find out a lot of bibliographic information and historical context. Many of the rare books that I showed today were part of the Elizabeth Ball donation in 1986. So actually this past summer, I started a research project working with the archives at Minnetrista, and more specifically, the papers collection for George and Elizabeth Ball. So during that research, I learned something interesting about two items in our collections here at Ball State. One of the items that were listed in the donation for the archives from the George and Frances Ball Foundation was a mounted chart containing 48 of the 56 original signatures by the signers of the Declaration of Independence. I wasn't sure what this was when I started to look through the archives at Minnetrista, but I learned that in the 20th century, there was a market for collecting letters, receipts, bills, and deeds with signatures by the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence. Who knew, right? So one of the first things I came across when I was doing my research was a magazine called The Collector, a magazine for autograph and historical collectors. This was an article regarding complete sets of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. The author, Joseph Fields, had completed a survey of private and public collections looking for complete sets. In the article, George Ball, who is Elizabeth Ball's father, was mentioned as having a set but not complete. I thought to myself, is this what we have at Ball State? I continued to look through the archives of father and daughter book collectors and found a file titled Correspondence to George A. Ball regarding signers of the Declaration of Independence. In this folder, I found correspondence between George A. Ball and a Mr. Thatcher regarding the purchase of this complete set and an invoice. I was confused and unsure, so I went to Google. I had a name and a subject. Now, as an archivist librarian, researching is backed up by facts, and sometimes what is on the internet is not always truthful. But Google is a good place to start, but not the end. I typed in George Ball, signers of the Declaration of Independence, and the fourth link led me to the IU Lilly Library cataloging record for the item. Alas, the item at Ball State was not this complete set. It was fine. I had found at least where the George A. Ball set went, and all of the bibliographic information of the item was included in the cataloging record. And much of the bibliographic information was in the letters between George and Thatcher. In this case, Google was the end. But I kept seeing files regarding rare letters by Thomas Jefferson, John Hancock, and John Adams. I kept thinking, was George Ball trying to make another set? Unfortunately, I don't think so. We do have the mounted chart of signatures, but I found one more interesting treasure during this summer's project. I came across a wonderful edition of The Life of George Washington by Washington Irving in our rare book collection. This set is accompanied by an album with multiple handwritten letters from our country's founding fathers. So this was a nice surprise for me and my staff the day that we found it. So many of us in the department are fans of the musical Hamilton, which maybe some of you on this call are as well. So at the end of the musical, when Hamilton and Burr are singing their last letters to one another, Hamilton signs off, quote, "Your obedient servant." Aaron Burr signs off, A. Burr. So when I saw the handwritten letter from Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr in this album, the first thing I looked for was how they signed off their letters. And sure enough, Hamilton signs off, "Your obedient servant," and Aaron Burr signed off, A. Burr. We were thrilled to see these things. As I said, we were fans of the musical, and it was really just a fun day in the summer in the archives that day. So this album too also has letters from Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and the Marquis de Lafayette. So this was also a collecting practice to collect letters by the individuals mentioned in the book and then add them to an album. Again, who knew? Wonderful new research I learned while visiting the archives at Minnetrista. But as you can see from the slide, there were plates, pictures of each of the individuals. So we have Benjamin Franklin on the left with his picture, and then a letter with his signature. Thomas Jefferson is in the middle, and underneath, it's kind of hard to see on the slide, but it does say at the top that he wrote it from Monticello. And then the Marquis de Lafayette is the last picture on the screen. So while doing my research and looking through the archives of George and Elizabeth Ball at Minnetrista, I found the invoice for a couple of our treasures. But most of the invoices had lot numbers, and without the book dealer or auction house catalog, it is hard to make any real identification and learn more about the bibliographic information or history of ownership. All in all, I learned a lot more about our collection here at Ball State by using the archives at Minnetrista. But on the screen, you can see the blue invoice is the invoice for our chained book that actually came from the UK, and it got marked as duty free because of age, which I think is absolutely just interesting to see. Down at the far left corner of the screen is the invoice for the 4-edge painting for the Common Prayer Book that I had shown. And then there's also the invoice for the Gutenberg Bible that is in our collection. So in closing, I hope you got a nice overview of the rare material we have here in archives and special collections. As I mentioned, we provide course instruction, but we also have reference and research services available. If there's something of interest you saw or heard about today, please give us a shout out. We are open Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Our email and phone number are on the screen, and I'm happy to take any questions that anyone might have.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. That was an amazing presentation, and I think that every slide included something that would be of interest to all of us. So are there any questions for Sarah today? Okay, well, I appreciate everyone's attendance today. Nicole Etchison says, great presentation, Sarah. I love the story about Charles II. Yeah, that's great lore and really interesting as well. And some just really beautiful treasures from our collection. And these are things that, you know, have come to us through the generosity of many donors over many years. And we're just thrilled to be stewards of these and to use these as teaching items as we work with faculty and students and even researchers around the world to take a look at these things and to interpret them and help us to understand the value of these and the invaluable, I guess really the invaluable aspect of all of the archival items. I see here Laura says that she loved the matzo. Let's see. I love the matzo and antacid. So quirky. Thank you, Sarah. I think that's the first time, Sarah, I have ever heard about that. And I can tell you that I've had a couple of lunches where I might have begged for the antacid or since I've come to Ball State. So thanks again, everyone, for coming, and just a wonderful presentation today from Sarah Allison. And we're so grateful for the time that you put into this and for sharing this with all of us. So everyone have a great day. Thank you.